Welcome back to Crimson Ed Talks. I'm your host, Jamie, and today I'm sitting down with a special guest, Shadman. Not only has he rocked the admissions process, but he's rocked it twice, going to elite schools including Duke University and Stanford, and smashing the Standardize test at both, nailing the SAT, the ACT, and the GRE. Today, we're going to pick his brain to figure out how he did this, what was his process, and what are his tips for you in your Standardized testing journey. To begin with, can you kind of walk us through your relation with Standardized tests?
Absolutely, Jamie. So my Standardized testing journey really took off in my 10th grade when I was a sophomore in high school. And it began with the PSAT or the pre-SAT. So my family was quite aware that the pre-SAT was on its way. And it's a great way to get a lot of early recognition for scholarships and universities to reach out to you. So we actually began prepping for the PSAT, specifically in the math section, knowing that that's often where students struggle. And as we took that PSAT, it was actually a really good indicator and journey map for the rest of my standardized testing experience. Getting my PSAT marks back in my sophomore year really helped my family and I understand what was needed for me to hit my goal, which at the time was to achieve a 2300 out of 2400 on the SAT. So we then started the summer before my junior year scouting different test prep coaches and doing really targeted prep in each of the areas that I had identified through my PSAT as places that I need to work on and continue developing so that I could really get towards my goal.
And what was your mentality like when you thought about the SAT or the ACT? Did you view this as like a scary mission? Did you view it with a lot of optimism? What was your mentality like as a student? And then how did that change when you came back for your second rodeo with the GRE?
I think so. One of the interesting things about the process was starting early really helped minimize any intimidation that I had for the exam. Obviously, there's a lot riding on these exams. Oftentimes, you're very much told the test will make or break your dream school applications. And so by starting as early as my summer before junior year, I was really able to treat it as another course that I was taking as part of my high school experience. So after school, I would work with a tutor on different math sections. And then every day after dinner, my mother would actually have 10 flashcards of new vocab words to quiz me on. And every time I didn't get a word correct on my first try, she would just add it back to the stack on the next one. But I think the biggest lesson for me and really what drove my application, my standardized testing process and into getting the eventual results that I did was after I had taken my second SAT, I had gotten a 2250, which was short of my goal. But at the time I was explaining to my parents, hey, this is enough. I think this is what's going to move the needle. And my parents, bless them, really encouraged me to think big, to really push myself and created a reward system, which I really encourage anyone going through the long marathon of standardized test prep, which was essentially to my 16-year-old brain. My mother said, if you get a 35 or 36 on the ACT, I'll give you my old Honda Accord. And that flipped the switch for me. And it really, not only, I think it's very difficult when you're taking standardized tests to recognize the importance of it and keep fueling that motivation for yourself throughout the whole experience, but knowing that there was a tangible reward of a car depending directly on my score made the feedback loop for my motivation much tighter and smaller. And I drilled in. For that ACT exam prep, I had one thick book for ACT and I went through every single diagnostic exam through that book. Every weekend I would block out 2 hours just going through as many exams as I could, crushing vocabulary cards. And man, oh man, Jamie, let me tell you, when I got that 35 and I hopped in my new car, I knew that I had won.
I love it. Oh my God, what a story. My mum got off cheap. I got a PlayStation for getting first in my year. And, I just feel I didn't negotiate hard enough. Well done, man. Well done. Alrighty. So tell me a bit about, what people refer to as test anxiety. Some students will come up and they'll talk to Crims and they'll say, hey, I'm not a good test taker. What's your reaction when you hear that? What do you think about test anxiety and any tips and insights you give about performance on that day?
Yeah, I think when I hear that, I hear, frankly, just that you haven't been exposed enough to the exam itself, that you haven't been exposed enough to test-taking strategies that will help you address the test and break it down. Basically, the most important thing that I encourage students whenever they're taking a standardized test, be it SAT, ACT, GRE, GMAT, is really start taking your diagnostic exams early and then treat it as a problem, as a puzzle that needs to be solved. What are the different categories of problems that you're struggling with? Sit down with an expert tutor and really help break it down with them. Okay, you seem to be missing a lot of problems as it relates to probabilities, or ratios is an area of weakness that you're looking to improve. These are the ways that you take a very large standardized test and make it much more manageable in chunks, and then you can break it down as different parts of your growth to focus on. And frankly, the great thing about working with someone who's an expert in the test-taking process is they really teach you the nuances of each test. the way that it really helped my process was not looking at it as if it was just one big mega test that I had to ace. I had to think of it as like I said, as a puzzle that had its own nuances, its own tricks. It was a bit of a game. There was amount of time that I would need to spend on specific questions. There was certain categories that it made more sense to guess, learn how to guess on different parts of the sections, how to make informed test-taking decisions. It really is like an entire game that you go through and maneuver. And when you frame it like that, it becomes much more approachable and frankly fun. I started having quite a lot of fun during my diagnostic exams. I definitely sound like a little bit of a nerd here, but trust me, when I got that car, I was cool all over again. So it really helped out.
I love that. Now, a lot of students ask us, okay, this is all great, but schools are now test optional. So I can actually apply to a school like Harvard without a standardized test. What's your reaction to that?
This really comes up a lot in the graduate school space. And frankly, I hear it a lot in the undergraduate realm as well. And basically, you hear that and obviously it makes sense on the face. But when you think about when you're going through the application process, who are you competing against? An admissions committee is not looking at you just purely in a vacuum and saying, okay, here's Susie, check, check, check. Okay, she didn't take the SAT. It's optional, so it's fine. We're only looking at these requirements. That's really not how an admissions committee is considering you. They're thinking about a student body holistically. They're thinking about, okay, where does Susie fit in to our broader community, to the class that we're looking to build? And when you're thinking in comparison to a bunch of students, you have to be quite competitive in the way that you're thinking about stacking up against the other applicants in the admissions pool. And if you don't have an SAT or is ACT score, it's really going to hurt you in the long run when you have someone in your application pool who has a pretty similar resume and story and CV and grades as you, but if the difference is that you didn't take an exam to really differentiate yourself and show that you've done this extra mile and you've got this extra score, that could really hurt and penalize you in that overall process. And on the grad school side, this is really important for international students. For international students, taking a GMAT, taking the GRE is a great way to add another important data point to your application that is globally recognized by top tier institutions of saying, hey, this is exactly, okay, they got this score in the GMAT. We can now put this in the context of their quantitative scores on their undergraduate transcript and really see the value that this student can bring.
And just building on that, I mean, it was really interesting to see just this week, the news came out from Dartmouth that they're going to make SAT required again. And as you actually read through the analysis of their admissions officers describing why in their leader of admissions, they said, actually, there is almost nothing as predictive as your GPA at Dartmouth as your SAT score. So they really established this very causal link between the two. And I think that makes a lot of sense because the preparation required to excel in a standardized test, as you've said, is very structured. And all of those practice exams that, diet of practice and regular routine is necessary to get that good GPA as well. So we're seeing that trend where actually the schools that were optional are switching back. And we expect to see schools like Harvard and Yale switch back pretty soon as well.
Precisely.
So we've spoken a lot about, how you rocked the SAT with this magic Honda from mum and dad, won that prize, bought the ACT, got that 35. Tell us, when it comes to the GRE, what was your motivation like as a graduate student? Any differences in approach? Was it a Tesla? How did you go ahead and get that GRE score?
The GRE process actually really exposed me to the differences in how grad students approach application process with undergraduate students. When you're in your workforce and you're looking to apply to schools, taking a test is much more rigorous and difficult to take time out of your day to prepare for. So it really taught me the pain points of that experience. I had to implement a lot of the same structures that I did when I was in high school. Carving out days of the week where this is just test prep time. Every single weekend, blocking off 2-3 hours where my phone is far away, no distractions. I'm only working on my exam. And frankly, this actually only came from trying to do diagnostics, just being like, oh, I aced the SAT, ACT. It should be pretty easy for me to do the GRE. That is not the case. Even if you were an excellent standardized test taker in undergraduate, you really need to make sure that you do the same study habits, the same routine, learn about the intricacies of the GRE and the GMAT in the very exact way that you approach the earlier standardized exams. Because if you don't, you're really going to see the consequences of that decision when you start to take the exam and show up. You've got to build that muscle up just like that. But the hard part is there's a lot less support out there for GRE and GMAT prep, and there's a lot less intentionality that students bring to the table when they're going through it.
Incredibly well said. To wrap us up a little bit, every standardized test does, of course, have its own unique flavor. How you prepare for the GMAT, the GRE, SAT, ACT, these are, of course, all very different. But there's a lot of consistent traits that are very useful. from using a tutor to help you master that content effectively, going through those practice exams, making sure you've got a clear goal in mind, not really getting too psyched out about, what kind of scores you need, recognizing this is a journey. And even if your first test is a bit dicey, I've seen kids improve hundreds of points. I had a student who's now a Wharton MBA graduate. When she first took the SAT, she had a score which was basically around the 60th percentile, very weak. But she put in nearly 300 hours of preparation. She got that up to a score which helped her get into Swarthmore College. And then she parlayed that into Bain and then Wharton MBA. So these standardized tests can really unlock amazing admissions results, as we heard today from Shadman. Thanks so much for joining us. And I hope you guys enjoyed another episode of Crimson Ed Talks.
Thanks, Jamie.